and wait for Group 10.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to speak after the noble Earl, Lord Lytton, and I rise to speak briefly and narrowly to a point made earlier by the noble Lord Foster, in which he argued for a national registration scheme rather than one which, as the noble Earl said, the Built Environment Committee said should be available locally and at local option. And he gave a reason for that, which was that having a national registration scheme would make it easier for the government to gather large amounts of data. I think that is a very weak reason for what would be, in fact, an astonishing intrusion into privacy and the rights of property. The noble Lord Blunkett, said that a national scheme was preferable because it could be implemented more quickly than a scheme implemented by a local authority, I believe, if I don't misrepresent him.
It wasn't me.
I beg the noble Lord's pardon, but I did hear those remarks made, and I simply say that I simply don't believe that. I mean, any scheme implemented by the government at the national level is going to take a very long time to bring forward, whereas a local authority duly empowered and with sufficient interest in the matter would be able, in my view, to act more, and my experience, to act more quickly. One of the important findings here of the Built Environment Committee was that this problem certainly exists, but it exists, as the noble Earl said, in very localised areas. And we need to understand the problem if we're to find a solution. And we need to understand that very important localism and find locally tailored solutions rather than rush into a national scheme which would be applied to the whole country and which would involve a great deal of resource being spent to no particular purpose. I simply say that. We will, as the noble Earl said, have the opportunity of returning to this later when we get to Group 10, whether this evening or on our next day. I make only one other comment. There is, as certain noble lords have said, an anomaly in the taxation of properties, depending on how they are declared. So if they are declared to be residential, then they are liable to domestic council tax like anybody else. But if they're declared to be in business use, which is what an Airbnb-type property might be, then they pay business rates. But of course, business rates are not paid by by anything other than quite large businesses. Very small businesses don't have to pay business rates. So by declaring oneself for business rates, one then qualifies for threshold exemptions that aren't available if you're a domestic ratepayer, domestic council taxpayer, and so effectively one escapes any form of tax on the property at all. Now that is clearly an anomaly that is worthwhile the government thinking about, but it does seem to me that the right way of addressing this is to change the tax rules rather than to introduce a large distortion in the property market. It's going at the solution, it's giving us a solution which is at the wrong end. If the problem's with the tax rules, then it is better and easier to remove the anomaly from the tax rules, I'd suggest. But we will have an opportunity to return to these later.
My Lord, say